What if I told you that right now, as you're listening to this, you should have a tail? That's right. Somewhere in the tangled mess of human evolution, we got cheated. While monkeys swing through trees and cats elegantly balance on fences, we're over here struggling to sit straight in office chairs like a bunch of tailless amateurs. Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast that drags bizarre hypotheticals into the light so we can poke them with a stick. Today, we're entangling the knotted question: what if humans had tails? Picture this. You're in a crowded elevator, and the person in front of you suddenly whips around, smacking you in the face with a fluffy appendage you didn't even know they had. No, it's not a bizarre fashion choice, it's just Gary from accounting, expressing mild annoyance through involuntary tail flicks. Because let's be honest, if we had tails, we'd have absolutely zero control over them. They'd be the emotional equivalent of a dog's wagging tail, except way more embarrassing. First date going well, your tail's doing happy little circles. Boss calls you into their office. That thing's tucked so far between your legs it's trying to escape out your collar. And fashion. Forget about it. The entire clothing industry would collapse overnight. Pants would need a whole new hole, tailors would charge double for tailored fits, and sitting down would become an Olympic sport. Sorry, let me just adjusts tail for the 5th time. Okay, now I can focus on this meeting. Beloved chairs everywhere would be gouged with scratch marks from restless tail tapping. Then there's the social minefield. Handshakes, outdated. Now it's all about tail greetings, delicate raps for friends, respectful nods for strangers, and aggressive thumping for that one coworker who steals your lunch. Dating profiles would list tail flexibility as a top trait. Swipe right if you're into prehensile grips. And forget hiding your emotions, your tail would rat you out instantly. Oh, you're not mad? Then why is your tail slamming into the furniture like a wrecking ball? But the real chaos. Sports. Soccer players would be disqualified for tail-assisted balance. Basketball would devolve into players whipping each other mid-dunk. And baseball. The catcher's tail would be the ultimate mitt. Meanwhile, golfers would spend more time entangling their tails from their clubs than actually playing. Of course, evolution doesn't just hand out accessories without reason. So why didn't we keep ours? Did some ancient ancestor lose a bet? Was it too much effort to coordinate limbs and a tail? Or did early humans just collectively agree, you know what's not sexy? A 5th limb that collects dust like a furry broom. One thing's for sure, if we still had tails, the world would be a far more honest and chaotic place. No more poker faces, no more subtle exits. Just a room full of people broadcasting their moods like emotional antennae. And honestly, we'd probably have way fewer misunderstandings. And way more broken vases. But this is just the tip of the tail. There's so much more to unpack. Like how workplaces would adapt, how laws would change, and whether tail envy would become a real psychological condition. So stay tuned, because things are about to get appendaged. Now let's dive into the workplace implications of a tailed humanity. Imagine walking into an office where every cubicle has a tail-friendly chair and the break room is littered with tail grooming kits. HR departments would have to add a whole new section to the employee handbook, Tail Etiquette 101. No flicking tails at coworkers during meetings, no using tails to snag the last donut, and absolutely no tail tripping in the hallway, unless, of course, it's Gary from accounting. Again, job interviews would become a whole new level of awkward. So, tell me about your strengths. Well, I'm a team player, I'm highly organized, and I have excellent tail control. Tail control, prove it. Cue the candidate nervously wrapping their tail around a chair leg while trying to maintain eye contact. And let's not forget the dreaded tail test for jobs requiring physical coordination. Can you balance on one foot while your tail holds a cup of coffee? No. Next, office politics would get even messier. The boss's tail would be the ultimate power symbol, always held high, swishing confidently as they strut through the office. Meanwhile, interns would have their tails tucked so low they'd practically drag on the floor. And the passive-aggressive tail flick, that would become the new eye roll. Oh, you're sure you didn't steal my stapler? Then why is your tail twitching like a metronome? Meetings would be a minefield of tail-related distractions. Someone's tail would inevitably knock over a water bottle, someone else's would get tangled in their chair, and at least one person would spend the entire hour absent-mindedly thumping their tail against the table. Productivity would plummet, but morale, Through the roof. After all, how can you stay stressed when you're surrounded by a sea of wagging tails? Then there's the issue of workplace fashion. Tail-friendly suits would become the norm, with discreet slits in the back for maximum comfort. But woe betide anyone who forgot to groom their tail before a big presentation. Sorry, I can't focus on your sales pitch. Your tail looks like it got into a fight with a hairbrush. And don't even get me started on the rise of tail accessories. Tail warmers, tail jewelry, tail ties, the possibilities are endless, and the corporate world would eat it up. But the real game changer. Team building exercises. Forget trust falls and escape rooms. Now it's all about tail-based challenges. Alright, team, today we're going to practice synchronized tail wagging. And remember, the key to success is communication. Cue a room full of adults trying to coordinate their tails like a furry, slightly uncoordinated orchestra. Of course, not everyone would thrive in this new tail-centric workplace. Some people would struggle with tail control, constantly knocking over coffee cups and accidentally smacking their coworkers. Others would develop chronic tail anxiety, obsessing over whether their tail was sending the wrong message. And then there'd be the overachievers, the ones who'd mastered advanced tail techniques and lorded it over everyone else. Oh, you can't use your tail to open doors. That's cute. But despite the chaos, there's something oddly comforting about the idea of a workplace where everyone's emotions are on full display. No more guessing whether your boss is secretly mad at you, just look at their tail. No more awkward silences, just a room full of tails wagging in unison. And no more boring meetings, just a constant reminder that we're all just animals trying to navigate the corporate jungle. So the next time you're stuck in a soul-crushing meeting, take a moment to imagine what it would be like if we all had tails. Sure, it might be a little chaotic, but at least we'd all be in it together. And who knows? Maybe a well-timed tail wag could be the key to surviving the 9-to-5 grind, but this is just the tip of the tail. There's so much more to explore, like how laws would adapt, how relationships would change, and whether tail envy would become a real thing. So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more appendaged. Now let's venture into the legal and political implications of a tailed humanity. Picture a courtroom where the judge's tail is the ultimate symbol of authority, held high and perfectly still, like a furry gavel. Lawyers would use their tails to emphasize arguments, flicking them dramatically to punctuate key points. Your Honor, my client is innocent. Tail slam. Meanwhile, the defendant's tail would be the ultimate tell, twitching nervously with every damning piece of evidence. Laws would have to adapt to this new appendage. Tail-related offenses would flood the legal system. Tail tripping, tail flicking in restricted areas, and the ever-popular public indecency via tail exposure. Traffic laws would be rewritten to account for tail signals. Sorry, officer, I didn't see your tail indicating a left turn. And let's not forget the rise of tail insurance, because accidents happen, especially when you're swinging an extra limb around in a crowded space. Political campaigns would take on a whole new dimension. Candidates would flaunt their tails as a symbol of strength and agility. Vote for me, I have the most flexible tail in the race. Debates would devolve into tail-based theatrics, with opponents trying to outwag each other for the audience's approval. And the ultimate power move, a well-timed tail wrap around the podium to show dominance. Legislation would face new challenges. How do you define reasonable tail use? What constitutes tail harassment? And how do you enforce tail-related laws without infringing on personal freedom? The debates would be endless, and the legal jargon even more so. Section 12, subsection B. No tail shall be used to manipulate voting booths, unless said tail has been registered as an official appendage. International relations would also be impacted. Diplomatic meetings would require tail translators to interpret subtle flicks and twitches. The ambassador's tail is raised at a 45-degree angle. This is a sign of cautious optimism. Treaties would include clauses about tail etiquette, and cultural misunderstandings would abound. In our country, tail wagging is a sign of respect. Well, in our country, it's an insult. Even the justice system would face new dilemmas. How do you punish someone for a tail-related crime? Community service, tail restraint devices. And what about prisons? Tail-proof cells would become the norm, with inmates spending hours trying to outwit their own appendages. I swear, officer, my tail acted on its own. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect would be the rise of tail-based activism. Protests would feature synchronized tail wagging, and social movements would adopt tail gestures as symbols of solidarity. We demand tail equality for all. Mass tail thump, and the ultimate act of rebellion. A defiant tail flick in the face of authority. Of course, not everyone would be thrilled with this new tail-centric world. Some would argue that tails are a distraction, a frivolous appendage that complicates an already complex legal system. Others would worry about the potential for tail-based discrimination. Sorry, we don't hire people with stubby tails. And then there'd be the conspiracy theorists, the ones who believe tails are a government plot to control us. Wake up, sheeple, they're tracking us through our tails. But despite the challenges, there's something oddly poetic about a world where our tails are a reflection of our emotions, our intentions, and our humanity. Sure, it might be chaotic, but at least it's honest. And who knows, maybe a well-timed tail wag could be the key to solving some of the world's most pressing problems. So the next time you're stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare, take a moment to imagine what it would be like if we all had tails. Sure, it might be a little messy, but at least we'd all be in it together. And who knows, maybe a well-timed tail flick could be the key to changing the world. But this is just the tip of the tail. There's so much more to explore, like how relationships would change, how art would evolve, and whether tail envy would become a real thing. So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more appendaged. Now let's explore the social and relational dynamics of a tailed humanity. Imagine dating in a world where your tail is your most honest feature. First dates would be a minefield of involuntary tail flicks and awkward twitches. So, do you come here often? Tail thumps nervously against the chair. No, not really. Tail curls into a defensive loop. The entire evening would be a silent conversation between tails, with both parties trying to decode each other's body language. Relationships would take on a whole new level of intimacy. Forget holding hands. Now it's all about tail intertwining, the ultimate sign of trust and affection. You know you're serious when your tails start syncing up. But with great intimacy comes great responsibility. Tail hygiene would become a non-negotiable part of any relationship. Honey, did you wash your tail? It smells like yesterday's lunch. Breakups would be even messier. It's not you, it's your tail. Tail flicks aggressively. Oh, so now my tail's the problem. Tail slams into the wall. The ultimate power move, blocking someone's tail on social media. Sorry, I can't see your tail posts anymore, it's too painful. Family dynamics would also shift. Parents would have to navigate the delicate balance of teaching their kids proper tail etiquette. No, sweetie, we don't flick our tails at the dinner table. But why not? Tail knocks over a glass of milk. Sibling rivalries would escalate to tail-based warfare. Mom, he's using his tail to steal my toys. I'm not. Tail whips around defensively. Even friendships would be impacted. The ultimate sign of camaraderie. A synchronized tail wag. You know you're best friends when your tails move in perfect harmony. But woe betide anyone who crosses the line. Did you just flick your tail at me? Tail bristles with indignation. Oh, it's on. Tail thumps aggressively. Social gatherings would become a tail-centric spectacle. Parties would feature tail-friendly seating, tail-themed games, and even tail grooming stations. Hey, can you help me untangle my tail from this balloon string? The ultimate icebreaker. A well-timed tail wag. Nice tail. Mind if I join you? But the real challenge, navigating the workplace romance. Sorry, I can't focus on this report. Your tail keeps distracting me. Tail flicks playfully. Oh, really? Maybe you should pay more attention to your work. Tail wraps around chair leg defensively. The ultimate power couple, the ones who can coordinate their tails during meetings. Did you see how their tails moved in sync during the presentation? Relationship goals. Of course, not everyone would thrive in this tail-centric world. Some people would struggle with tail control, constantly knocking over drinks and accidentally smacking their loved ones. Others would develop chronic tail anxiety, obsessing over whether their tail was sending the wrong message. And then there'd be the overachievers, the ones who'd mastered advanced tail techniques and lorded it over everyone else. Oh, you can't use your tail to open doors. That's cute. But despite the chaos, there's something oddly comforting about the idea of a world where our tails are a reflection of our emotions, our intentions, and our humanity. Sure, it might be a little messy, but at least it's honest. And who knows? Maybe a well-timed tail wag could be the key to solving some of the world's most pressing problems. So the next time you're stuck in a social dilemma, take a moment to imagine what it would be like if we all had tails. Sure, it might be a little chaotic, but at least we'd all be in it together. And who knows, maybe a well-timed tail flick could be the key to changing the world. But this is just the tip of the tail. There's so much more to explore, like how art would evolve, how technology would adapt, and whether tail envy would become a real thing. So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more appendaged. Now let's examine how technology and infrastructure would adapt to our new appendages. Imagine smartphones with tail-friendly interfaces. Swipe left with your fingers, swipe right with your tail. Touchscreens would need tail-resistant glass after countless incidents of overenthusiastic wagging shattering displays. The tech industry would explode with tail accessories, wireless charging docks that groom your tail while it charges, waterproof tail sleeves for rainy days, and the inevitable, a tail tracking app that monitors your wag patterns. Transportation would undergo radical changes. Car seats would feature tail holes with adjustable gaskets. The auto industry would introduce tail airbags to prevent painful pinching. Public transit would become a minefield. That empty seat next to you isn't actually empty, someone's tail is occupying it invisibly. Elevator etiquette would require new rules about tail positioning. Please keep tails clear of closing doors. Signs would appear everywhere, largely ignored. The fashion industry would face its greatest challenge yet. Tailored clothing would require complex new patterns accounting for different tail lengths and fluffiness. Winter coats would need insulated tail sleeves. Formal wear would incorporate tail jewelry, delicate chains for subtle wagging, or bold cuffs for statement makers. The red carpet would never be the same as celebrities flaunt their elaborately styled tails. Home design would evolve dramatically. Architects would incorporate tail-friendly features, rounded corners at tail height, tail washing stations by entryways, and special tail perches on furniture. The open floor plan trend would reverse as people sought tail privacy. Restaurants would offer tail hooks under tables. Movie theaters would install tail hammocks between seats. Medical technology would advance to address tail-related health issues. Chiropractors would specialize in tail alignment. Physical therapy would include tail coordination exercises. The pharmaceutical industry would develop creams for dry tail skin and supplements for shiny tail fur. Emergency rooms would see a surge in tail in the door incidents. The workplace would install tail-friendly equipment, keyboards with tail-resistant covers, chairs with adjustable tail supports, and meeting rooms with tail relaxation zones. Office pranks would reach new heights as coworkers tied subtle weights to sleeping colleagues' tails. HR departments would create exhaustive tail harassment policies. Sports equipment would be completely redesigned. Bicycle seats would need tail accommodations. Gym machines would require tail stabilization. Yoga classes would offer advanced tail balancing poses. The extreme sports community would invent terrifying new tail-based activities like tail bungee jumping. Even our pets would be confused by this development. Dogs would constantly misinterpret human tail wags. Cats would alternate between disdain and fascination. The pet industry would boom with interspecies tail communication guides and tail playdate services. As we navigate this tail-integrated world, one thing becomes clear: every aspect of our lives would require rethinking. From the clothes we wear to the chairs we sit in, humanity would need to adapt to our new reality. The transition wouldn't be smooth. There would be stepped-on tails, trapped tails, and endless awkward tail moments. But ultimately, we'd find our balance in this strange new normal. The implications extend far beyond what we've covered here. How would art change? What about space travel? Military applications? The questions multiply faster than we can answer them. One thing's certain: with great tails come great responsibilities, and we're just beginning to understand what that truly means. Our exploration continues as we examine how tails would transform entertainment, education, and even our concept of beauty. The journey gets even more fascinating from here, as we discover just how deeply this one change could alter human civilization. Now let's dive into the world of entertainment and how it would adapt to our new appendages. Picture a movie theater where every seat comes equipped with a tail hammock, allowing viewers to relax while their tails sway gently in the air. Action films would feature dramatic tail stunts, heroes using their tails to swing from buildings or disarm villains. Rom-coms would have that iconic moment where the leads, tails intertwine during their first kiss. Horror movies. Forget jump scares. Now it's all about tails suddenly bristling in fear. Music concerts would become a spectacle of synchronized tail movements. Fans would wag their tails in rhythm to the beat, creating a sea of waving appendages. Musicians would incorporate tail gestures into their performances, guitarists wrapping their tails around their instruments for dramatic flair, drummers using their tails to hit extra cymbals. The ultimate encore, a crowd-wide tail wag that shakes the entire venue. Theater productions would need to rethink their choreography. Ballet dancers would incorporate elegant tail movements into their routines, while actors would use their tails to emphasize dramatic monologues. To be or not to be. Tail flicks dramatically. The most challenging role. The one where you have to keep your tail perfectly still for an entire act. Video games would revolutionize their controls. Forget joysticks. Now it's all about tail movements. Racing games would require precise tail flicks to steer, while action games would have you whipping your tail to attack enemies. The most immersive experience. Virtual reality games where your tail movements are tracked in real time. Congratulations, you've defeated the dragon. Now untangle your tail from the couch. Sports broadcasting would add a new layer of commentary. Did you see that tail flick? That's a textbook move right there. Analysts would break down players' tail techniques, and slow-motion replays would focus on those crucial tail moments. The most coveted job, tail cam operator, responsible for capturing every wag, flick, and thump. Even literature would be impacted. Authors would describe characters' tails as a way to convey emotions. Her tail twitched nervously as she approached the door. Poetry would feature tail-related metaphors. Love is a tail that wags without reason. The most challenging genre, tail-based horror. The tail in the dark moved closer, its bristles glinting in the moonlight. Art galleries would showcase tail-inspired masterpieces. Sculptures would feature intricate tail details, while paintings would capture the elegance of a tail in motion. The most controversial exhibit, the Tale of Modernity, featuring abstract interpretations of tail movements. Social media would explode with tail content. Viral videos would feature impressive tail tricks, while influencers would flaunt their perfectly groomed appendages. The most popular trend, the tail challenge, where people attempt increasingly complex tail maneuvers. Can you tie a knot with your tail? Let's see. But the real game changer, tail-based therapy. Her therapy would become a legitimate treatment for stress and anxiety, with patients spending hours petting their own tails. The most relaxing experience, a tail massage, where trained professionals work out all the kinks and knots. Of course, not everyone would be thrilled with this tail-centric entertainment world. Some would argue that tails are a distraction, a frivolous appendage that complicates an already complex industry. Others would worry about the potential for tail-based discrimination. Sorry, we don't cast people with stubby tails. And then there'd be the conspiracy theorists, the ones who believe tails are a government plot to control us. Wake up, sheeple, they're tracking us through our tails. But despite the challenges, there's something oddly poetic about a world where our tails are a reflection of our emotions, our intentions, and our humanity. Sure, it might be chaotic, but at least it's honest. And who knows? Maybe a well-timed tail wag could be the key to solving some of the world's most pressing problems. So the next time you're stuck in a boring movie, take a moment to imagine what it would be like if we all had tails. Sure, it might be a little messy, but at least we'd all be in it together. And who knows? Maybe a well-timed tail flick could be the key to changing the world. But this is just the tip of the tail. There's so much more to explore, like how education would change, how space travel would adapt, and whether tail envy would become a real thing. So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more appendaged. Now let's explore how education would transform in a tailed world. Imagine classrooms where every desk has a tail-friendly slot, allowing students to sit comfortably while their tails rest at ease. Teachers would have to master the art of tail-based classroom management. Please keep your tails to yourselves during the test. Tail thumps in protest. I mean it. No tail cheating. Curriculum would expand to include tail-related subjects. Biology classes would dive deep into tail anatomy, while physical education would feature tail coordination exercises. Today, we're practicing the art of tail balance. Remember, a steady tail equals a steady mind. The most challenging class, Tail Etiquette 101, where students learn the do's and don'ts of tail behavior. Exams would take on a whole new level of complexity. Multiple choice questions would include tail-based scenarios. If a student's tail is twitching nervously, what is the most appropriate response? Essay questions would require detailed tail analysis. Compare and contrast the tail movements of different historical figures. The ultimate test of skill. The tail practical, where students must demonstrate advanced tail techniques. Extracurricular activities would flourish with tail-based clubs. Tail Choreography Club would practice synchronized tail movements, while Tail Sports Club would invent new games like tail volleyball and tail tug of war. The most competitive event, the annual Tail Olympics, where students compete in tail-based challenges for glory and bragging rights. Teachers would need to adapt their teaching styles to accommodate tails. Please raise your tail if you have a question. Tail shoots up excitedly. Not you. Gary, your tail is blocking the projector again. The most coveted teaching tool. The tail pointer, a device that allows teachers to direct attention with a simple tail flick. School uniforms would undergo significant changes. Tail-friendly designs would become the norm, with discreet slits and adjustable tail covers. The most popular accessory, tail warmers, keeping students cozy during cold winter months. The ultimate fashion statement, tail jewelry, adding a touch of flair to the standard uniform. Parent-teacher conferences would feature tail-based assessments. Your child's tail movements indicate a high level of creativity but a tendency to distract others. Tail flicks defensively. I see what you mean. The most challenging conversation, addressing tail-related bullying. We've received reports that your child is using their tail to trip others in the hallway. Even school lunches would be impacted. Cafeterias would need tail-friendly seating arrangements, while lunch monitors would enforce tail etiquette. No tail flicking food across the table, please. The most popular lunch item, tail-shaped cookies, because of course, not everyone would thrive in this tail-centric education system. Some students would struggle with tail control, constantly knocking over supplies and accidentally smacking their classmates. Others would develop chronic tail anxiety, obsessing over whether their tail was sending the wrong message. And then there'd be the overachievers, the ones who'd mastered advanced tail techniques and lorded it over everyone else. Oh, you can't use your tail to open doors. That's cute. But despite the challenges, there's something oddly comforting about the idea of a world where our tails are a reflection of our emotions, our intentions, and our humanity. Sure, it might be a little messy, but at least it's honest. And who knows, maybe a well-timed tail wag could be the key to solving some of the world's most pressing problems. So the next time you're stuck in a boring lecture, take a moment to imagine what it would be like if we all had tails. Sure, it might be a little chaotic, but at least we'd all be in it together. And who knows, maybe a well-timed tail flick could be the key to changing the world. But this is just the tip of the tail. There's so much more to explore, like how space travel would adapt, how military strategies would change, and whether tail envy would become a real thing. So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more appendaged. Now let's examine how military and defense strategies would evolve in a tailed society. Imagine boot camp where recruits spend hours mastering tail camouflage techniques. Special forces operatives would develop silent tail communication systems, a quick flick to the left meaning, enemy spotted, 3 slow wags signaling, all clear. The most elite unit, the tail commandos, trained to use their appendages as lethal weapons capable of disarming opponents with a single whip-like motion. Military uniforms would require complete redesigns. Standard issue gear would include tail armor plating and weather-resistant tail sleeves. The most controversial piece of equipment, the tactical tail holster, allowing soldiers to carry extra ammunition in their appendages. Night operations would present unique challenges as troops learn to keep their tails perfectly still to avoid detection. Naval warfare would undergo dramatic changes. Submarines would need tail-friendly seating arrangements, while aircraft carriers would install tail safety rails to prevent accidents. The most dangerous assignment, tail gunners on fighter jets, requiring perfect coordination between hands and tail during high-speed maneuvers. Cybersecurity would expand to include tailprint identification. Just as fingerprints are unique, military scientists would discover each person's tail movements create a distinct biometric signature. The most secure facilities would require both retinal scans and tail wag patterns for access. Of course, this led to the rise of tailprint hacking, spies attempting to replicate high-ranking officials' tail movements to infiltrate secure locations. International espionage would become far more complex. Spies would need to control their tails perfectly to avoid giving away emotions during interrogations. The most valuable intelligence: decoding foreign leaders' tail movements during diplomatic meetings. Notice how his tail stiffened when we mentioned the trade agreement. He's hiding something. Peacekeeping missions would develop new protocols. UN troops would learn neutral tail positioning to avoid appearing threatening. The most challenging assignment: refugee camps where tail-related injuries became common among displaced populations unused to living with the appendages. Humanitarian aid packages would include tail care kits alongside food and medicine. Veteran affairs would need to address tail-related disabilities. Prosthetic tails would become increasingly sophisticated, with some models featuring built-in tools for daily living. The most heartbreaking cases: soldiers suffering from phantom tail syndrome, experiencing pain in appendages lost in combat. Military research would pour billions into tail enhancement technology. Experimental programs would test tail strength augmentation and neural interface systems allowing direct tail control. The most controversial project: the development of tail-mounted weapons systems, raising ethical questions about the limits of human augmentation. Of course, not all changes would be serious. Barracks would see endless pranks involving tied tails and tail-related initiation rituals. The most popular military joke: how many recruits does it take to change a light bulb? One to screw it in and 10 to keep their tails out of the way. As we consider these implications, one truth becomes clear: in a tailed world, warfare would become both more complex and strangely more personal. The same appendage that comforts a child by wrapping around them protectively could become a weapon in trained hands. This duality forces us to confront fundamental questions about human nature and conflict. Our exploration continues as we examine how tails would transform space exploration, scientific research, and humanity's place in the cosmos. The final frontier may never look the same again when we bring our tails along for the journey. Consider space exploration in our tailed reality. Astronaut selection would now include tail dexterity tests alongside the standard physical exams. The notorious spinning chair assessment would be updated to evaluate tail stabilization during rotation. Maintain tail position while we induce vertigo would become the new nightmare of aspiring spacefarers. Spacecraft design teams would tear their hair out accommodating this new appendage. Every surface would need tail-friendly padding in zero gravity, where a careless flick could send someone spinning across the cabin. Sleeping arrangements would require tail restraint systems to prevent nocturnal wagging from disturbing crewmates. The most cursed job in NASA: calculating exact tail-to-body mass ratios for proper life support calibration. Spacewalks would become exponentially more complex. Engineers would develop tail tethers and specialized EVA suits with reinforced tail sleeves. The most terrifying malfunction: a tail getting caught in spacecraft mechanisms while floating outside the station. Mission control would add new emergency protocols. Houston, we have a problem. My tail is stuck in the solar panel array. Lunar colonies would feature tail-centric architecture. Habitation modules would include tail grooming stations to remove moondust. The most unexpected challenge: lower gravity making tail movements unpredictable. Astronauts accidentally hitting themselves in the face would become a daily occurrence. Mars expeditions would face unique tail dilemmas. The thin atmosphere would necessitate heated tail coverings during surface operations. Rover cockpits would be redesigned with tail-neutral seating positions. The most heartbreaking footage from the Red Planet: watching a homesick astronaut's tail droop while recording a message for Earth. Interplanetary relations would take on new dimensions if we encountered tailed aliens. Anthropologists would study cross-species tail etiquette. The ultimate diplomatic breakthrough: a human and alien ambassador intertwining tails in a gesture of peaceful intent. Scientific research would flourish with new tail-related studies. Biologists would investigate tail neurology, why certain emotions trigger specific movements. Physicists would calculate tail-based propulsion possibilities in microgravity. The Nobel Prize in Medicine might go to researchers who discovered tail position affects brain chemistry. Space tourism would market tail experiences as major attractions. Feel your tail float freely in zero-G. Brochures would promise the most expensive upgrade: first-class tail massages during orbital flights. The most common tourist complaint: forgetting their tail needs sunscreen during spacewalk excursions. long-term space habitation would present unforeseen tail challenges. Generational ships would need to account for tail evolution in reduced gravity. The creepiest shipboard legend, rumors of a mutated tail growing independently in the bio lab. Back on Earth, space agencies would develop bizarre training simulations. Neutral buoyancy labs would test tail-assisted equipment repair underwater. The most ridiculous drill, practicing emergency tail evacuation procedures from mock spacecraft. Yet for all the complications, tails might provide unexpected advantages in space. Astronauts could develop new tail-based work techniques, holding tools or stabilizing themselves with precise movements. The most watched viral space video, an ingenious engineer using their tail to catch floating equipment mid-spin. As humanity reaches for the stars, our tails would remind us of our earthly origins. Every involuntary wag in zero gravity, every subconscious flick during intense concentration would connect spacefarers to their primal past even as they chart our cosmic future. The final frontier just got a lot more interesting, and a little more clumsy, with this additional appendage along for the ride. As we wrap up this tail-centric journey, let's reflect on the profound impact this single change would have on every aspect of human life. From the way we interact with each other to the way we explore the cosmos, tails would become an inseparable part of our identity. They'd remind us of our primal roots while challenging us to adapt to a world that's both familiar and wildly different. Imagine a world where our tails are a constant reminder of our emotions, our vulnerabilities, and our humanity. A world where honesty is built into our very biology, where a flick of the tail can speak louder than words. Sure, it would be chaotic, stepped on tails, tangled tails, and endless awkward moments, but it would also be honest, raw, and deeply human. So the next time you're sitting in traffic, stuck in a boring meeting, or scrolling through social media, take a moment to imagine what it would be like if we all had tails. How would your tail move in this moment? What would it say about you? And most importantly, how would it change the way you see the world? Thank you for joining us on this wild thought experiment. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to What If Horizons for more mind-bending explorations of the impossible. Share your thoughts. What would you do if you had a tail? Let's keep the conversation wagging. Until next time, keep imagining the unimaginable.